Welcome. I am the database guy. This is something I've been wanting to do for a very, very long time. I'm glad you can join me. Please like and subscribe. This is coming to you absolutely free. I am going to give you a program or a curriculum, I should say, in database development, which spans all of what you see here. And it's going to be very in depth. It's going to be something that I'm going to touch on just about anything and everything you could conceivably think of in database development. And it's important because most people do not know how to use Access to develop a database. And for good reason. There is a lot of work that typically goes into it, but it's exciting, it's interesting, and it is crafted to how you require your application to function. Not all of them are going to be the same. So we're going to get into the introduction today, excuse me, and then get into other areas quickly. What I want to impress upon you is the importance of Access. It's something you get as part of Microsoft 365, or maybe you have it in a different version of Office, whatever it might be. I recommend you get the newest one. In any event, we'll get to the course outline, the rest of it later on at some point as we go through it. So we're in introduction, our first bullet point. And today I want to show you what is and what is not a database and how to understand that, how to look at that, how to see that. Then, of course, the differences between Access, SQL Express, and SQL Server and what they are. And then, of course, what is a front end versus what is a back end? When we call this jargon in database, what do we mean? And then, of course, what the MS Access interface is going to entail or what you would want to see. And then we're going to talk about the file types that are currently existed in Access and some older ones that no longer will work. And then, of course, object types, the general things that you'll see in Access. And then, of course, the navigation pane. We're going to show you what that is. So I'll start here. Most people can't even fathom what a database is. They really don't know. If we go to number 2 of what it's not, most people are using Microsoft Excel as a database. They fill it up with data in their spreadsheet, which is RB. You're going to have replication of data, which is not what we want to see in a database. And then you're going to filter it. And this is what people are doing. They're filtering their data to get the rows that they want to see. And it isn't usually specific either. They may get 10 or 12 rows. They may get one if they filter out the right column. But it's not a database. Going to the left side here, 1. Databases contain tables, and the tables hold the data unlike a spreadsheet. And multiple tables can hold the data, and that data can be in relationships. Meaning, if, for example, I want to create a database of a phone book, all right, and I may have another table with just states and territories in it so that I can access that to enter that information as part of my phone book. Or what I may want to do is I may want to link that state table at some or create a third table states to, let us say, um, phone book entries, okay, and link that to my main table. Why? So that I can look up the state. Now, it's probably more effort than you need. That's probably not a great example, but let us say if we go to a table of books and I want to link my publishers, there's an important one because I can link, I can get a table of publishers and then I can have a table of book publishers. And so what I do is I open up that secondary table, book publishers, and I select the publisher and I select the book. And I have that link there, or I can do it from the books table if I want to. Just simply select the publisher. We're going to see how those things work. So by selecting the publisher link in the books table, then when I go to the publishers table, I can see every single book that that publisher has published, which makes sense to us. This is the power of a database. You don't do that with Excel. The other thing is there could be restrictions on what you want to save and how you want to save it. You can say, I can't have null data. Can't have it. Got to have, meaning I have to have data in that field. And we're going to tell you what a field is shortly as well. Or something else, right? I may have a way of data that's going to be entered into that field. I may want to keep it, if it's a social security number, I may want to keep it or hidden so I can't see what, or only the last 4 digits seen, right? I may have restrictions on how data is entered or how data is saved. And then, whoops, I'm sorry, let me go forward again. And then it's searchable. And there's a difference in the searchability, I think, in a database. So when you go to search for a particular user or a particular person, you are essentially sending that information to a query. The query is saying, find only this person, and it will list the data where you see it in a report or on a form. Now, there's a big difference in a filter. A filter in Excel, once you filter things, you have to unfilter them. In a database, you do not have to do that. Unless, of course, and we're going to get to that too, you can apply filters in a database as well. And they're not really practical, in my opinion. If I wanted to filter out and find a certain person in the same way I'd search for them, I could do that, but then I have to unfilter that form. All right, I can't do it with a report. I don't believe I can do filters with a report. In directly within a report, I can filter a report. I can run a filter to a report and show it, which is totally different. But the filter is still on that, most likely. Well, no, it won't be, because I can send it when I'm opening the report. I can add the filter in it or whatever it might be. We're going to see that later on. It's not as restrictive, but if I try to filter a form, it's the same way with Excel. I have to unfilter it. Not useful. However, one last point on these filters. There's another great way to use it, and that is, and I don't really call it a filter, I call it a requery. If I have 3 drop-down boxes, and the first one I'm selecting a state, all right, so I select the state. The second drop-down box will only, when I set that up, will only query data that is in that state. So it's a requery. It's not really a filter. You could call it a filter, but it really isn't. Then when I select the information within that state, all right, let's say it is agencies. Now the third drop down will only give me people within that agency. So you see it's a dynamic filtering or query querying effect. You're going to see that too in this course. So again, summing up this slide here, you don't ever want to filter data because it really isn't what a database is used for. Access does provide filters for reasons. We're going to see them, but you want to search it, and that's a whole different thing. It goes through a query. All right. Okay. So here are the differences between Access, SQL Express, and SQL Server. Access has a 2.2 gigabyte limit. Sounds like it's not too big. It's quite large. I've never seen any client that I have had ever exceed that. It's very hard to. And I could give you an example of that. It probably would fill up something like 30,000 lines in Excel based upon, I don't know how many columns, but it's quite a lot of data. All right, now when we say that limit, we're talking about the table limit, the data the tables can hold. Microsoft Access can hold your tables, and that's called a back end. Whatever holds the tables is called a back end. We go to SQL Express, it ups to 10 gigabytes. Really enormous amount of data. SQL Server, whatever the size of your shared drive is, if it's a terabyte, it'll hold a terabyte of data. Now, let's talk about that for one moment. All right. Is more data going to mean my database is going to run slower? The answer there is, it depends. Hopefully, you're querying the data or you're listing the data specifically so that you're not querying all of it. If you were to query all, let us say, 400,000 pieces of data, and you wanted to populate all of them to see them, it's going to take you time. But if your database is set up like one of my clients where um, you query between a certain time frame, so between December of 2022 and December of 2023, you're going to do better. Month to month, even better. So the amount of data, it won't slow your database down. But if you want all of it, it will. So it's a matter of when you want to see the data you want to see, it's fast. One thing I can tell you is if you have a database, let's say, of orders, you're running a company and you want to see all of the orders for a given client. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. It's not going to be it shouldn't be an enormous amount of data, but it'll be a good amount of data. Fine. But if you wanted to see every one of your clients this year, it may take a little longer. All right, shouldn't be terrible. But if you want to see the entire history, good luck because that's going to take you a long time. We're going to see that. I don't normally find it to be a problem in that sense. It just isn't. I can only tell you that when massive amounts of data are attempted to be queried, and that's usually with a SQL Server or SQL Express backend, that's when things can slow down. That being said, I wouldn't worry about it right now. It's not a big concern of yours. So we talked about the back end. Now SQL Express, SQL Server are only back end applications, meaning they only store table data. Only. Access can store table data and can also have a front end, which is a graphic user interface. And that front end, that graphic user interface can be tied into either Access, SQL Express, or SQL Server, depending upon how you want to set up your database. All right. And you have to connect. You're going to see a connection string. You're going to see how that works as well at some point. Then you have Visual Basic coding. Because you're dealing with the front end, you have to code it. And Visual Basic becomes the backbone of customizability, but you've got to know how to use it. And there's a whole branch of this course dedicated to that. Um, SQL Express is typically a free application. Um, so it's not an issue of getting it. It's nice to have it. But where you install it, that's a whole nother argument. You can put it on your own computer and run Access and SQL Server there, or you can put it more importantly on a shared drive. Install it on a shared drive, set up your tables there, make your connection from your front end and Access to that, and you'll be fine. And everybody, and there's another point of it too. Front end and back end development, the way it's set up here allows multiple users up to 255 to access the database at a time. Now that number is not, by the way, an error. It happens to be the highest binary number, or I'm sorry, hexadecimal number you can get, right? 2 to the 0 plus 2 to the 1, 2 to the 2, up to 2 to the 8. 256 is how many, right? I think it's um, bits in a byte or something like that. I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but 255 is the maximum that you could have. You never hit that in my experience in industry, and I've been doing this, forgive me for not saying, for 17 years, is you'll probably don't have more than, you'll be lucky if you had more than 100 people doing this, you know, on the database at one time. It's likely you're going to have even less than half of that. I had a database for an industry for safety work, and what happened was um, you had everybody in research using this. So I think the most you could have at one time was probably 25, if that, maybe 20. All right. SQL Server needs a license. It does. Without the license, you can't get a copy of that. So the question is, how much is that? I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that they also charge for maintenance on it as well. So SQL Server becomes quite expensive, or can be. Going back to Microsoft Access, it's part of Microsoft Office 365. You can pay $99 a year and get it as part of that. And by the way, if you get the family plan, you get 5 people to share it or use it, so it's pretty cool. And also, there's a large knowledge base in Microsoft Access. In everything I'm teaching you and what you'll be learning, it's just a lot of information out there. One of the guys that taught me, he's out there on his website, that'll do it. A wonderful gentleman by the name of Bill Mosca. You can look him up. He is an expert, um, certified, and so on. I am not, but I tell you, I have not gone for it yet. But it's something else. He's done a lot of work. He's been around for years. I knew him from an original web page that we worked on together, a website, I should say. We were servicing people's issues, and I got to become an expert there. So, uh, really a wonderful guy. Now, SQL Server and SQL Express, you can, in order to access or create the tables and the views and things like that, and we'll show you that at some point. You need to have another tool, and the other tool is called SQL Server Management Studio. It connects you with the instance of SQL Express or Server, and allows you to create whatever tables, relationships, and so on, restrictions, and so on you need. For SQL Express, there's an ease to using it. I believe there is, because it's a watered down version of SQL Server. Um, versus SQL Server, there are some challenges, but overall good to use. It's a little more, but it's not terrible. And then the 2 little points at the end, instance needed, means that you need to install it somewhere. And usually the rule is on a shared drive, a shared network, whatever it might be, where you can access it or where your users have access to it. All right. There's a little overview on the 3 of them. What we're going to be seeing is access with access backend, front end and back end, or access with a SQL server, probably a SQL Express in our case, back end. I could show you examples of what SQL Server looks like too, but those clients are proprietary, and I don't know if I can reveal that here. I don't want to. All right. This little visual is what I just described, right? The Access front end, which has tables, queries, forms, reports, VBA code, etc. And you can tie into one of 3 possibilities with code. Those are one of them could be your back-end tables. Now, this being said, you can only tie into one at a time. All right. Now, I should take that back for a moment. One SQL type of set of tables at a time. I don't think you would want to. I've never seen a setup where somebody is tying into uh, a SQL Server and a SQL Express. So it's rare. But I could have Access backend and a SQL Server backend. Why you'd want to do that, I have no clue. You really want to keep it a 1-to-1. All right, so this is good. All right. Well, I'm sorry, I just added a slide by hitting enter. All right, so here is our Access interface. When you open up Access, I'm not going to do it here, but the first thing you're going to see is what's called the ribbon. It's the newest thing that they had developed many, many years back. They went from a menu bar, which had drop downs, to a ribbon. And the ribbon contained functionality to access functionality and do things with it. You can hide this ribbon if you want and create your own custom ribbon. You're going to see that as a possibility here, as well as custom images. Now, there are some limitations, and you'll see that as well. So, but the ribbon is interesting, and you can minimize that ribbon so you have maximum amount of real estate. Above that is the database name and of course some toolbars. You can hide the toolbars as well, but the database name should always be there. The next one towards the left is that navigation pane. This is only going to be seen in developing. Once you deploy it, you're going to hide that because you don't want people to access anything that's there. They could get into tables, they could get into whatever you want. And you're going to deploy it not in one file form, we'll get into it shortly, but in another one where you cannot modify anything as well. And to further add security to this, you're going to make sure that you cannot click the X to close the entire access application dialog box. You're going to block that. I'm going to show you how that's done. And the other one, there's a weakness in access. If I hold the Shift key down and I click on the file to open it, I can get to the navigation pane. And we're going to show you how to prevent that too. So developers like myself over the years have figured out ways to ensure that people only deal with what they need to deal with. And the big space, as you see, is that work area, which, as I said, getting rid of the navigation pane, getting rid of the ribbon, or going to a customized ribbon and minimizing it will give you as much real estate as possible. And at the bottom, there's a notification bar which tells you what's going on, if it's processing a query, and so on. This is how Access looks currently, and you'll get used to it, but it's like any other Office application in that sense. Now we'll look at the file types. We're just mentioning this here. Historically, you had an MDB and an MDE. The original site I worked for with Bill Mosca was www.mdbmakers.com, and that one went defunct, obviously because those types no longer exist, but they just decided to close it down. They've had enough. And now, instead of going with an MDB, Access or Microsoft said we're going to go with an ACCDB. Now, the ACCDB is a developing environment, is the primary field for developing code and everything else. Once it's deployed, it's the ACCDE. All right? It prevents users from modifying most any object or code. And by the way, you also have to password protect your code because even that, now in an ACCDE, you could get into Visual Basic. It is possible by hitting F11, I think, if memory serves. But you would then, what you would do would be, you would password protect the Visual Basic library. So these are the file types right now. Now, can you bring an MDB into? I believe you can. It's going to tell you it's an old version. It's going to make a conversion, but you may find a lot of challenges there with the old formats and a lot of old things like controls and so on. So I would modernize and keep it modernized. The object types. What information would we find within Access? You're going to have tables, and tables hold data, locally or linked. You're going to see what that means. A table holds records. Each record has a piece of data that is a field. So if you can visualize that in your head right now, let's say I've got a book, right? I have a record for a book, Moby Dick. That's the title of the book, okay? And then what I have is I have the publisher. That's a field. I have the author. That's a field, and so on. All those fields together make up the record, which is in the table, right? Well, queries displays, modifies, deletes, or appends or allows data as a source of other objects. Queries are enormous, right? I can take a query and make it the source for a form or a report. I can take a query and I can simply display data. I can take a query and I can delete data or append data to a table or update, which means modify data to a table. I can do a lot of things with a query. All right. You're going to find that that's a big portion of this. A form is an interface for user interaction. The most general way I can say it is exactly that. When you want your user to interact with the database, that's where forms come in. All right. So if the user has to add a record, edit a record, find a record, um, search for a record, that's the same thing as maybe find a record. Forms are what you're going to use. Okay. If there's a menu bar, you're going to have a form, or a menu, you're going to have a form. And we're going to see different types of menus. Navigational one is nice. Used to be something called the switchboard. I don't care for the switchboard anymore because there are better ways to approach it, personally. Then you have the reports. The report is what it is. Data will be displayed visually or it can be printed. You can export to other applications. You can export to, close down my, my Outlook, I'm sorry. You can export to PDF. You can export to Excel. There are some limitations. I believe Word is another option. So you can have data moved into different formats as well, but you got to be careful on that as well. Then you have a macro. Macros are no longer really used anymore. There's no need to. Originally, macros were the way to automate processes until Visual Basic came along. Now Visual Basic becomes the primary source of automating, and the macros really are more cumbersome. So stay away from macros. If you want to play with them and learn about them, you can. There used to be a macro called the auto exec macro, which ran at startup, but you don't need to do that because you can specify a form to startup to run at startup in your options, so you don't need to do that. Then you have a basic module, which is your VBA coding, all right? And it can be a general public coding that's used a function, a subroutine. We're going to learn what these are. Or it can be something that's the backbone of a form or a report in some way. But that's where you're going to be the majority of the time, almost all the time. The other one's called the class module. It's very specific VBA code for custom classes. I may show you this at the very end, but there's not a whole lot here that I think you're going to need. It's a little more advanced for people. And finally, we were going to do a demo, but I'm not going to demo right now. The demo was to go into Access and show you it. I don't think I have to at this point. So to sum up with the introduction here to Access is this, is that you have a lot of work, a lot of capabilities that Access has, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get it to do what you want it to do. It's fun though. It's not difficult once you learn it. I believe it's fun because it's based upon something called object-oriented programming. Every application you work with is object-oriented programming. In other words, Access is an object. Within Access, there are other objects, tables, forms, reports. Within those objects, there are other ones we call controls, and so on and so forth. It really is easy when you think about it in those terms. So if I want to look for a form main, named form main, FRM main, and I want to find a control on that form, it really is that flow of events, and you're going to see it. You're going to see ways of calling objects in Visual Basic, but you're going to understand how these things work. So with that, I'm going to close it for today, but there's so much more. This is the first video of the first presentation, and please like, subscribe, and join me because there's going to be a whole lot more. When we come back, Our next video will be on naming conventions, and there's a reason why. I want you to understand this and why it's important. We being myself, Bill Mosca, and other experts at that site I told you about, pushed this because it's going to make your developing and access so much easier to deal with. Most people don't get this. In any event, have a great day, evening, morning, wherever you may be, and I will see you soon. Again, I'm the database guy. Keep it here.